Criminal charges filed this week, 1 month after the life of a 20-year-old Milwaukee woman came to a violent end. CBS 58's Michelle Fiore sat down with the victim's parents today, and she joins us now live in the studio. Michelle.
Bill, Kania Brunson's mom calls her daughter her best friend. 2 men face charges, but the criminal complaint points to lies others told, and for that, Kania Brunson's mom is pressing ahead. Kania Brunson turned 20 in June, a joy to be around.
She can make you smile right away.
Brunson wanted to be an orthodontist or a vet, later learning she was good at making others look good, so she enrolled in beauty school.
She actually taught me how to put on eyelashes and do my eyebrows.
This is Brunson leaving home the morning of September 24th, texting her mom a smiley.
I wasn't even there 30 minutes and they called and told me her car was found. And I knew then, at that point, like, something happened to her.
The day of the murder, police say Brunson met up with a married man she'd been seeing, Sultan Shareef. Strangely, he'd reached out to Brunson's mom a week earlier.
He goes on to say, I want to be done messing with your daughter, but she's reaching out to my wife.
September 24th, a friend of Shareef's called 911 after he says he saw Shareef on top of the victim in Shareef's car and that the female stated, "He cut my throat." She was screaming and pleading for help. Police didn't locate the two then, but hours later were called to an alley near Keefe and Palmer where Brunson had been tied, shot, and then set on fire.
She was everything to me. She was everything, and this is the most hurtful feeling.
Police interviewed a number of people, including Shareef's wife, who claimed he'd been with her the night of the murder, which the complaint says was debunked through video evidence.
And they think that they're going to be out here and live their normal life after they, helped with this.
Shareef's brother-in-law, Johnny Allen Hopgood, is charged as an accomplice.
It's still hard to believe that she's not, here with us.
Bond for Sultan Shareef is $500,000, and for Johnny Allen Hopgood, it's $50,000. Both are due back in court next week. Reporting live in the studio, Michelle Fiore, CBS 58 News.
It starts with smoke. Not the kind from a backyard grill. Not the kind that drifts from a neighbor's chimney. This smoke smells of gasoline, of melting plastic, of flesh. Somewhere in that darkness, someone knows exactly what's burning and exactly who they left behind. They say the most dangerous secrets are the ones that don't belong to you. This one belonged to a married man, a man twice her age, a man who carried more than just a gun in his waistband. He carried the knowledge that if his wife ever found out, life as he knew it was over. And then she told her. When Milwaukee's sun rose that September morning, there was nothing left but ash, twisted wire, and the outline of a body too damaged for a stranger to recognize. But to someone, she wasn't a stranger. She was the problem that had to be erased. Was it love, jealousy, or a plan disguised as care? Before we go further, if you think this could never happen to someone you know, you're exactly the person who needs to keep listening. This channel tells the stories most people wish they had heard sooner, because sometimes knowing what happened to her is the only thing that stops it from happening to you. Hit subscribe now. And if you won't, go to the comments and tell us why you'd rather stay in the dark.
Welcome to Twisted Crimes Files, where the darkest truths come to light. Stay with us for chilling stories you won't forget, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a case.
Her name was Kania Brunson, 20 years old, bright-eyed, warm-hearted, and the kind of young woman whose smile seemed permanently ready for the camera. She had big dreams, bigger than the city blocks she grew up on. Some days she saw herself as an orthodontist, crafting perfect smiles. Other days, she imagined becoming a veterinarian, caring for animals too small to defend themselves. Lately, her heart leaned toward cosmetology, turning beauty into both a craft and a career. To her family, she was more than just a daughter or a sister. She was the kind of person you could call at midnight and know she would pick up. Her father, Shante, saw in her a mix of strength and tenderness that made him proud and protective. She loved taking photos, documenting everything from nights out with friends to afternoons spent with cousins. On social media, she seemed untouchable, the kind of person everyone liked, the kind whose presence brightened a room. But behind that perfect smile, there was a truth she wasn't sharing publicly. A truth that would put her in the path of a man who should have been a distant acquaintance, not an intimate part of her life. Everyone loved her, except one person. His name was Sultan Shareef, 54 years old, twice her age, married, a man with a criminal past and a reputation for carrying one, sometimes two, guns wherever he went. To Kania, he wasn't just another man. He was the one who paid attention, the one who had the confidence of someone who had lived twice as long, the one who offered dinners, gifts, and moments that made her feel seen. Their relationship began when she was still a teenager. At first, it was hidden in shadows, meetings away from curious eyes, phone calls that ended quickly if someone else walked into the room. For him, it was casual. For her, it was more. She fell in love with a man who was never truly hers. Shareef had a wife at home, a life already built, and a carefully managed image. The affair was never meant to be exposed. It was supposed to be contained, something private, something controlled. But with control comes power, and with power came the subtle warnings. The way he could turn cold without explanation. The way his presence could fill a room with charm one moment and intimidation the next. The way every gesture, even the affectionate ones, carries shadow. She trusted him, and in the end, that trust would cost her everything. If you think you'd spot a man like this before it was too late, you might want to think again. Secrets like his don't announce themselves. They hide in plain sight, smiling. Subscribe now to hear the truths no one tells until it's too late. And if you don't, tell us in the comments why you'd rather believe it could never be you. In the final weeks of Kania Brunson's life, her story began to shift. It wasn't visible to everyone. Not to her friends scrolling through her Instagram stories. Not to the distant relatives who only saw her at family gatherings. But if you knew where to look, there were cracks forming. Small at first, barely noticeable, but growing day by day. It started with messages, the kind that weren't meant to be read by anyone except the two people involved. In the quiet hours after midnight, words passed between Kania and Shareef. Words filled with suspicion, hurt, and ultimatums. Her tone began to change. She was no longer speaking like a girl blindly in love. She was speaking like a woman who wanted answers. Those messages didn't just stay between them. Some of them, either through screenshots, whispers, or sheer determination, found their way toward his wife. We may never know exactly how much she learned, but we do know this. The illusion of control Shareef had enjoyed for years was slipping. People close to Kania noticed subtle changes. A deleted post here. A sudden, vague caption there. Smiling photos that disappeared from her feed without explanation. It's the kind of social media behavior most people overlook, but in hindsight, it was the digital equivalent of a storm warning. Then there were the sightings. Friends recalled seeing her and Shareef together in public. Not as openly affectionate as they once were, but with a tension that hung in the air. Witnesses remembered hushed arguments in parking lots, her arms folded tight against her chest, his voice low but sharp. In one telling moment, she posted a photo from a brunch spot, bright daylight, a plate of half-eaten food, her face turned just slightly away from the camera. To anyone else, it was just another picture. But to those who knew her well, the absence of her usual full smile was noticeable. No one realized this would be the last casual photo she ever shared. Meanwhile, Shareef's own behavior was shifting. Those close to him would later describe him as distracted, irritable, constantly checking his phone. He stopped talking openly about his business dealings, became more protective of his whereabouts, and started making uncharacteristic detours during his day. The breaking point came when Kania began directly reaching out to his wife. Why she did it, whether to force the truth into the open, to claim her place, or simply to push him into a decision, we'll never fully know, but set off a chain reaction. From that moment, there was no going back. For Shareef, exposure meant humiliation, a fractured marriage, and the possible loss of everything he had built his identity on. For Kania, it meant she had stepped into a dangerous position, one where her very existence threatened the life he was desperate to protect. Every day after that was a countdown. Whether she realized it or not, each call, each meeting, each text brought her closer to a decision he was already making in his mind. Not about the future of their relationship, but about whether she would live to see it end. No one around them knew they were watching the last days of her life unfold. And by the time anyone understood, it would be far too late to change the ending. Saturday, September 24th, 2022. The morning air in Milwaukee was crisp, the kind of early fall day that feels heavier than summer, but not yet sharp enough to burn your lungs. For most people, it was an ordinary weekend. For Kania Brunson, it would be the last day she ever saw the sun. Shortly after sunrise, she was seen with Sultan Shareef at an auto mechanic shop. They were there for radiator work on her Hyundai. Witnesses later said she looked quiet, distracted, not her usual self. Shareef, on the other hand, was composed, almost casual, like nothing was wrong. But underneath that calm exterior, a decision had already been made. The shop was small, the kind of place where grease clings to the air and the sound of tools hitting metal echoes from wall to wall. It was here that a man named Carver, a longtime acquaintance of Shareef, happened to stop by. He greeted them briefly, thinking nothing of it. It would be hours before he realized he was about to witness something he could never unsee. Later that day, Carver's phone rang. It was Shareef, his voice urgent, panicked. He told Carver he needed him. The tone wasn't one of casual conversation. It was a demand, the kind that pulls you toward trouble even before you understand why. When Carver arrived back at the shop, what he saw wasn't a cry for help. It was an act of violence in progress. Kania was in the back seat of her car. Shareef's knee was pressing down on her, pinning her in place. In his hand, a Phillips head screwdriver. He was jabbing it into her side with short, forceful thrusts. Her throat had already been slashed, a deep, deliberate cut, but she was still conscious enough to fight for her life. Her voice was faint, desperate, pleading for help. It was the sound of someone trying to grab onto the last threads of existence, knowing they were slipping away. Carver froze. This wasn't a scuffle. This wasn't something he could talk down. He confronted Shareef, telling him to stop, saying he wouldn't let him leave with her like that. But Shareef wasn't negotiating. He reached toward the dashboard and pulled out a gun. The gleam of the weapon ended the standoff before it began. Carver stepped back. Shareef got behind the wheel and, without another word, drove away with Kania still bleeding in the back seat. Carver didn't chase him, but he did call 911. He gave them Shareef's description, a partial license plate, and a clear account of what he had just witnessed. Within hours, flyers began circulating across Milwaukee, missing Kania Brunson. The image showed her smiling, but by then, she was likely already gone. That night, in the north side of the city, another man was inside his home cooking dinner when something outside caught his attention. His name was Justin Fields. Through his window, he saw a faint orange glow in the alley near Keefe Avenue and Palmer Street. At first, he thought it was someone burning trash, not unusual in that area. But as he stepped outside, the air changed. The smell was heavier, acrid, and wrong. When he got closer, he could make out shapes inside the flames. Arms, legs. What he was looking at wasn't garbage. It was a body burning in a recycling bin. He didn't hear any voices, didn't see anyone standing nearby, just the quiet roar of fire devouring everything it touched. Police and firefighters arrived quickly, but by then, the damage was nearly total. The body was charred so badly that investigators couldn't determine the gender at first. Dental records would later confirm it was Kania Brunson. There was no doubt in the minds of detectives. This was not an accident, not a moment of lost control. Her wrists were bound with wire or twine, the fire set deliberately, the location chosen for its darkness and isolation. The purpose was clear: to erase her, to burn away the evidence, to make her a problem that could no longer speak. By the time the flames were extinguished, Milwaukee's homicide unit had a crime scene that was both horrifying and incomplete. Whoever had done this believed they had destroyed their connection to the crime, but they hadn't counted on the trail they'd left behind, a trail that would soon point straight back to Sultan Shareef. In the hours after the fire, Sultan Shareef's movements told a story long before police ever questioned him. He didn't act like a man shaken by tragedy, or like someone who had just lost a friend. He acted like someone working against the clock, sealing off every door that could lead back to him. The first thing he did was disappear from his usual haunts. The neighborhood mechanic shops where he was a regular, he didn't show his face. The friends he usually called late at night, they didn't hear from him. Instead, he went aground, quiet, calculated, unreachable. When investigators began tracing Kania's last known contacts, his name surfaced quickly. Witnesses had seen them together earlier that day. Carver had already placed him with her in the crucial hours before she vanished. And yet, when police reached out, Shareef downplayed everything. He told them their relationship was casual. No arguments, no tension. Just two people who sometimes spent time together. But the words didn't match the rest of his behavior. He began moving his vehicles, parking them in different spots each day, sometimes blocks away from his home. One car in particular, a key focus of the investigation, seemed to vanish for stretches of time, only to reappear with subtle changes. A fresh scent inside, certain items missing, interior surfaces wiped clean. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like nothing. To detectives, it looked like someone trying to erase a moment in time. His phone habits changed, too. The man who was normally glued to his device suddenly kept it powered off for long stretches. When it was on, there were gaps in the call logs. Numbers deleted, text threads cleared. But in the digital age, deletion isn't disappearance. Cell towers had already recorded his movements, and those records were waiting to be pulled. There was something else, his conversations. The few people he did speak to noticed he redirected topics, avoided questions, and, when pressed, would get defensive, sometimes even aggressive. It wasn't the tone of someone under stress. It was the tone of someone who knew they had more to lose than anyone realized. Even in the presence of his wife, his demeanor was off. She didn't speak publicly about their interactions in those days, but neighbors noticed he came and went at odd hours, his posture tense, his eyes scanning, as if measuring who might be watching. And then there were the lies. Small ones at first, the kind you might overlook if you wanted to give someone the benefit of the doubt. But as detectives compared his statements to camera footage, to phone data, to witness accounts, the discrepancies multiplied. He wasn't where he claimed to be. He wasn't doing what he claimed to be doing. And most damning of all, when confronted with inconsistencies, he didn't seem surprised, only irritated that someone had noticed. It was in these quiet days after Kania's death that the case against him truly began to build. Not in a burst of evidence from a single moment, but in a steady accumulation of contradictions, suspicious choices, and calculated silences. To the outside world, Shareef might have seemed like a man keeping his head down in a storm. To the investigators watching him, he looked like a man trying to outrun a shadow and failing. By the time Kania Brunson's remains were recovered from the alley off Keefe Avenue and Palmer Street, the Milwaukee Police Department's homicide unit was already working under the assumption that this was a targeted killing. The brutality, the binding, the deliberate fire, none of it suggested random violence. This was personal, and the person they were looking at more closely than anyone else was Sultan Shareef. The first step was to secure and process the crime scene. What little of the recycling bin remained was photographed from every angle. Ashes were sifted through, each fragment of bone and melted material bagged separately. Investigators noted the distinctive pattern of the wire or twine that had bound her wrists, a detail that would later matter when comparing it to materials found elsewhere. In parallel, a second team began collecting surveillance footage. In a neighborhood like this, the police knew cameras could be their most reliable witnesses. They pulled recordings from corner stores, gas stations, private home security systems, anything with a view of the streets leading to and from the alley. Hours of footage were reviewed frame by frame. It didn't take long before one video, grainy but usable, captured a familiar vehicle turning into the alley in the dead of night. It was Shareef's, same make, same model, same worn bumper sticker partially peeled away in the corner of the rear window. Minutes later, that same car was seen exiting, lighter in the back, no passenger, and driving faster than when it entered. But it wasn't just cameras telling the story. Detectives filed warrants for Shareef's cell phone records. The data painted a map, one with pinpoints marking his exact movements. On the night of Kania's death, His phone pinged a cell tower less than 100 yards from the alley where her body was found. The timestamp aligned precisely with the surveillance footage. Inside the lab, forensic technicians were already examining one of Shareef's vehicles that had been impounded. The seats had been wiped down, but under the seams, faint traces of blood remained. Chemical testing confirmed it belonged to Kania. It wasn't enough to tell the story of how she died, but it placed her inside that car, bleeding before her body was ever set on fire. The search didn't stop there. Detectives compared the twine from the crime scene to supplies in Shareef's orbit. In a garage connected to him, they found a partial spool of wire that matched the length, twist pattern, and coating of what had been used to bind her. Witness testimony reinforced the physical evidence. Carver's account of seeing her alive but gravely injured was consistent with the forensic timeline. Justin Field's statement about seeing the burning body locked in with the surveillance footage and the cell phone data. Piece by piece, the case was becoming airtight. The prosecutors didn't just have one strand of proof, they had a web, each thread connected to the next, until it all pointed to the same conclusion. Sultan Shareef was not only present, he was responsible. By the time the arrest warrant was issued, the investigation had moved beyond suspicion. What remained was to put the entire chain of evidence in front of a jury and make sure there was no room for doubt. When the warrant for Sultan Shareef's arrest was signed, there was no public spectacle. No early morning raid splashed across the news. Detectives knew the kind of man they were dealing with. Someone who had spent years navigating danger. Someone comfortable carrying firearms. Someone unlikely to come quietly if he felt cornered. They planned it methodically. On the day they moved in, officers shadowed him at a distance, watching as he moved through the city. He wasn't heading anywhere unusual, just routine errands, the kind that might make a man think he'd escape suspicion. When the moment was right, 2 unmarked vehicles boxed him in as he pulled into a small lot. Uniformed officers approached from both sides. Their voices were calm but firm. "Sultan Shareef, you're under arrest for the murder of Kania Brunson." He didn't fight, but he didn't look surprised either. Those who saw him that day described his expression as flat, unreadable. The face of a man who had already rehearsed this moment in his mind. He said little as they searched him for weapons and read him his rights. By the time the news broke, the words first-degree intentional homicide and mutilating a corpse were printed side by side with his name. The courtroom phase began months later, but the tension was immediate. The prosecution's table was stacked with files, photographs, and a timeline so precise it felt like a minute-by-minute reconstruction. Across from them sat Shareef, dressed neatly in a suit, the lines in his face deeper under the weight of fluorescent courtroom lights. Behind him, rows of observers, family, reporters, members of the public, sat in silence. At the very back, Kania's father, Shante, watched every move. When the trial opened, Assistant District Attorney Ian Vance Curzon wasted no time. He told the jury this was a case about motive, control, and a man willing to do anything to protect his double life. He walked them through the chain of evidence, the surveillance video, the phone data, the blood in the vehicle, the wire bindings, the eyewitness accounts. Piece by piece, he built the picture of a man whose world was collapsing, and who decided the only way to save himself was to destroy someone else. The defense, led by attorney Jason Carlos Gonzalez, tried to reframe the story. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the police had locked onto Shareef too quickly, ignoring other possibilities. They urged the jury to separate emotion from fact, to consider that witnesses could be mistaken, that physical evidence could be misinterpreted. But in cross-examinations, those arguments began to unravel. Every alternate explanation they offered was countered by a hard detail, a timestamp, a match in forensic testing, a piece of corroborated testimony. Throughout the proceedings, Shareef rarely reacted. He didn't flinch when the photographs of the crime scene were shown. He didn't look toward the witnesses who testified against him. The only sign of strain came in the form of small, tight movements, the clench of his jaw, the way his hands stayed locked together on the table. The jury heard 6 days of testimony. It took them just 45 minutes to reach a verdict. When they filed back into the courtroom, the air was heavy, every shuffle of paper and squeak of a chair magnified. The foreperson stood and read the decision. Guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. Guilty of mutilating a corpse. Guilty as party to a crime. From the front row, Kania Brunson's face crumpled. Tears fell, but they were not the same tears he had shed at the start of this case. These were tears of relief, of justice finally spoken out loud. "I'm happy I got justice for my baby," he would say later. "It's been a long time coming." For Shareef, the verdict meant one thing, a mandatory life sentence. But for Kania's family, it meant something more. The end of a chapter they never wanted to live through, and the beginning of life without her in a world where her killer was finally named. When the courtroom emptied that day, justice was officially recorded on paper, but outside those walls, the shockwaves of the case were still spreading. For Kania's family, walking out into the daylight was a strange experience. The trial was over. The verdict had been read. The man responsible for her death was now a convicted murderer. And yet, there was no sense of celebration. How could there be? Justice had been won, but Kania was still gone. In the days that followed, the media covered the conviction heavily. Her face appeared on news broadcasts, articles, and social media timelines across Milwaukee. Each image captured her in moments of joy, laughing, smiling, unaware of the storm that would one day consume her life. To some, she became a cautionary tale. To others, a reminder of how fragile safety really is when it rests in the hands of someone unworthy of trust. The aftermath also brought forward names that hadn't been in the spotlight during most of the trial. One of them was Johnny Hopgood Jr., Shareef's own brother-in-law. At one point, he had been facing serious charges, mutilating a corpse and aiding a felon. But as the case progressed, a deal was made. In exchange for his testimony against Shareef, the charges were reduced to 2 misdemeanor counts of obstructing an officer. The sentence, time served, and 10 years of probation. For Kania's family, that was a bitter pill to swallow. Hopgood's cooperation helped secure the conviction, but the thought that someone connected to the aftermath of her death could walk free so soon left a sharp edge to their grief. It was a reminder that in courtrooms, justice can be complex. Sometimes it's about getting the bigger conviction, even if that means letting smaller charges fall away. In the neighborhood, the case became a touchstone for conversations people didn't want to have, but couldn't avoid. Women spoke quietly among themselves about warning signs they had ignored in relationships. Parents reconsidered how much they really knew about the people their children spent time with. Men who had known Shareef for years admitted they had seen flashes of his temper, but had never imagined it could end like this. The investigation team also felt the weight of the case long after the trial ended. Veteran detectives called it one of the more disturbing homicides they'd worked, not only for the brutality, but for the calculated attempt to erase every trace of the victim. They spoke of the quiet moments after the scene was processed, when the alley was empty again, and how the smell of smoke still seemed to hang in the air days later. For Kania's father, Shareef, the aftermath was about more than the conviction. It was about carrying his daughter's memory forward in a way that honored who she was, not just how she died. He talked about her dreams, her smile, her determination to live life on her own terms. And he reminded anyone who would listen that love without respect is not love at all. It's a warning sign. In the end, the trial's conclusion closed a legal chapter. But in homes across Milwaukee, the conversation was just beginning. Because when violence like this enters a community, it leaves behind more than one victim. It leaves behind a trail of fear, of second guesses, of broken trust, and of people determined never to let it happen again. When the headlines fade and the courtroom's empty, what's left are the pieces of a life cut short. Pieces most people never see. What we didn't see were the quiet moments that might have told the real story. The texts left unsent. The hesitation before answering his calls. The second guessing before walking out the door to meet him. We didn't see the split second where she may have realized the danger she was in, the moment her trust turned into fear. We didn't see how isolation works, how it creeps in slowly, making you believe there's no one you can tell without making things worse. And that's the real danger. It's not just the final act of violence. It's every small decision, every swallowed truth, every warning sign ignored because it's easier to believe the person you love could never hurt you. The kind of thinking that has ended far too many lives long before they should have ended. This wasn't a random crime. It wasn't an accident. It was a calculated erasure, proof of how far someone will go when they value their image over another human life. And that should terrify every one of us. Because somewhere right now, another Kania is laughing at a text, posting a picture, trusting someone who has already decided how her story will end. The question is, will anyone see the truth before it's too late? If you're watching this thinking, I'd spot the signs, remember, so did her friends, so did her family, until it was too late. Secrets like this are built to hide in plain sight. That's why these stories matter. They're not just about tragedy. They're about the patterns that lead to it, the choices that allow it, and the silence that keeps it going. If hearing what happened to Kania has made you more alert, more protective, more ready to act when something feels wrong, then you understand why this channel exists. Subscribe now, not because it helps us, but because every story you hear here could be the one that makes you see danger coming in time. And if you still choose not to, go to the comments and tell us why. Tell us why you'd rather gamble with being unprepared than face the truth head-on. For Kania Brunson, the chance to change the ending is gone. But for someone you know, someone in your phone right now, someone you love, that chance might still be there. Don't waste it. Rest in peace, Kania.